All right, cool. So guys, what we're looking at here is a deep dive of the Flowgear platform. So effectively, what we showed you previously was just a lightweight representation of what it looks like to build something out. Now, on top of that is obviously additional principles that come into shaping that particular solution to what is required for your environment. So do you have to do duplicate checking? Do you have to determine whether the data has been seen before, if there's any deltas? And so what we're going to do is exactly that. So we're going to go through some of those concepts, just breeze through it. The use case is still exactly the same, Shopify orders to 365 sales. We'll just be expanding on that workflow we built previously. I don't think we saved it actually previously, which is maybe a good segue into actual release management, but that's fine. We'll take a look at that.
Learn from our mistakes.
Exactly. Some of the stuff we want to look at is iterative design, so the description thereof is exactly what that looks like. We do not expect the person to go and build a perfect workflow and run it and it works, right? That's not how this works. The purpose of Flowgear is to be able to rapidly test portions of that integration until you're at a point where the integration is competent and you can move on to the next stage, right? So you can call it versions or whatever you like to call it. We have duplicate checks as well that we're looking at, so how do you not process the same thing again the second time? What we showed you previously would obviously do exactly that. We can touch on triggers again, but we mostly did already tell you guys what that looked like. And then error handling, which is very important. So what do you do in the event of an error and what those errors might look like? Then after that, we'll go on touch on some workflow architecture, so what are additional tools at our disposal, what they look like. Efficient querying and finding of deltas, so we'll show you what it looks like to actually determine when data is new and should be processed, and then also sub-workflows and encapsulation of functionality, and some reporting. So I think the first thing we're going to do is hand over to Carl, where he's going to take that workflow from the version that we had it and build out something a little more production ready, and then we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. Let's hope we save.
Guess I'm standing there.
The projector hits you in the face otherwise.
Okay.
There we go. All right. Let me make sure I can get the...
So I'll talk a little bit around what Carl's doing here, just to give you guys context around what he's trying to achieve at the end of the day. First thing that we'll look at here is going to be around the duplicate checking. So we're going to prevent this from creating the same workflow or same order over and over again. So he'll take you through what that's going to look like.
All right. So first things first, we need to make some space here, just so things are much easier to see and read. Last thing is drag and drop. Works through 90% of the platform, so it makes your life a breeze. For the duplicate checking, naturally we want to check these individually. We will be naturally, or we are pulling in a batch of records, and we want to just check each individual one, so we'll pass the ones that haven't been processed and fail the ones that have.
So the particular tool Carl's using there is called the for each. The purpose of that tool is to take a set of records, 100, 1,000, 10,000, doesn't matter, and allow you to split them one by one and pass them one by one onto the next stages of the logical process. So what you're seeing here is the particular fields that you can see is a source document, which is obviously what you're going to use for the splitting. Your encapsulation and path, which determines at what level you would like to split that document. So it could be at the account level or whatever it might be. And then also what the encapsulation will look like, as in what's the sort of root node going to look like. And then of course your chunk size, which is important. So you can determine, do you pass 1 record at a time, 10 records at a time, 1,000 records. So again, it could be 1,000 records, but then you pass 100 at a time. Now, what that will infer is typically your downstream architecture is going to be what determines this, because maybe the API you're working with only allows a batch of 50 invoices. So now you can set that 50 there, and that's what we're going to send through every time. Go, Carl.
All right. For now, as we mentioned, we're just doing one at a time.
So your get key values, this is part of one of the persistent types of storage that we offer. It's, as said, a key and a value that's stored against each other persistently on your tenant, and you can reference that key value across any of your sites. The important thing here is that now we can, for instance, in the case of what Carl's doing, we're going to query our key values to say, have we seen the order anywhere in our system yet? The simple logic here is if we haven't seen it, clearly we have to process this order, right? So let Carl carry on there. Sorry guys, is the flickering frustrating you? If we do something about that maybe. Okay.
All right, perfect. Skipped a step on my side, that's my bad. Naturally, we need to populate some data into the for each. It makes life a lot easier as you sort of work through these items, just adding the data through. You can always go clear it up later when you're pushing into production, but we kind of need to know what we're working with.
So here's a good example of iterative design. We're going to run this first section first, just from the query to the quick map to the for each, so we can see what the output of the for each looks like, because we want to use that sample document for the next stages. Let's call this version 2.
Is there concurrency in there, or is it still?
You can do concurrency, actually. We have a concept called parallel workflows, where the front end of a for each, you can say how many active workflows you'd like to use to fetch X records at a time. We're not going to show you here, but we can speak to it, obviously. Mostly because I haven't used it, so I wouldn't know how to show you.
It's one of the weird things of working with the platform. I've been working with it for a bit over a year now, and there's still some features I had no idea we had. There's too much stuff. All right, so as you can see, this has come out of the for each, single payload, and in terms of the encapsulation, you can see we've got the request and sales order. So we have a very, very solid idea on what that data structure is actually going to look like.
This is one record at a time, obviously, now. So what's happening now is the item that came out is automatically going to be applied to the for each output, so we can now hook that for each output to the next spot, where what Carl's going to do is he's going to use a data connector expression, as you can see the FX there, which can interpret XML, JSON, YAML, doesn't really matter. It's going to allow you to pick a field to extract from that document. And so we're going to use, I believe, the order number or whatever as the unique field to key against. We don't actually care what the value is at this point, we just want to know, does it exist?
Right, and then if that is missing, we're gonna pass it through to Dynamics. Handy little tidbit, when you do use these data expressions, it does convert the payload to JSON. Very important when you're sorting things out, it confuses the daylights out of you and you can't work out why it's not working.
So it's only when you pull a structure out, it's going to give you a JSON structure, but a single field will be a text field in this case.
Absolutely. All right, one thing I needed to check as well, some slight oversight on my part. I did use our. I'm so clever. Never
That's the
mind.
mapping you guys saw previously. And so the next step we're going to do is we're going to run this on the assumption that we're not going to find that key value. And so this is now, so let's say, V2 of this particular execution. It should run through no problem. We could, did you add a index number? That's fine, doesn't matter.
Did not.
So what you can also do there on the path is you can specify an index from 0 to whatever. So you say, I only want that particular record to run. This is just for testing purposes. You would never have it in production, but it is going to be important for not running through 1,000 different orders that we might be. Okay, it's fine.
While we're speaking about it, iterative design, very important.
There we go. So effectively, if you ever look at the for each there, which you hadn't hooked up yet, I assume, Carl?
Sorry?
Just run it one more time. Oh, you did, yeah. So you got the key value there where we see that the output was actually missing. Here's the unique order number that we pulled out from that document. And so the for each is telling us, oh, sorry, the key value is telling us we don't know what this is. We've not seen it before. Natural state would then be to progress to the next stage. Now, the next thing we want to do is actually interpret the response from Microsoft so that we can see whether this was successful. And if it was successful, we're going to log it against the key value so that the next time it runs, it's not there, right? We need to skip that part. So, Carl, if you can take a look at that.
This comes back to our flow control nodes. So we're going to grab the if equal. And this is another handy reason why always getting the response back from the API makes life a lot easier because you know exactly what's going to come back. So you can see there we actually have a status field.
While Carl's doing this, I'll speak to the two types of errors we have in the platform, typically speaking. We've got complete failures and partial failures. Complete failures we'll expand on. That's when your node fails to execute entirely. Now, this could be because the credentials are wrong, the database is down, who knows, right? We'll show you how you handle complete failures in a minute. But partial failures, you have to inspect the output from your API to determine what if 5 out of your 1,000 invoices failed? What does that look like? And so in this architecture, we're doing them one by one, and we're going to then see the response for each one and then mark those that have failed, those that have passed, and that's where we're going to handle the partial failures here. You don't have to do it one by one. We just wanted to show you what this might look like. But there are actually tools or provisioning to be able to push multiple records into a key value at a time if you have to do that.
And just to reiterate that for the guys that haven't worked with key values before, this is pretty much our only form of persistent storage within the platform. So if you do need to reference things from multiple workflows, if it's orders or something that you just want to double check or reassign context to, this is where you do it. All right. Okay. Now we do need the same group naturally, so you can set that across.
That group is going to be available across all of your workflows on your site. So if you need to pull a report later for that group of transactions that you've just referenced, you can do so in any workflow. We'll actually show you a reporting workflow that uses that exact same function.
And then we need to use the same key that we're getting out of the for each. Now, This is something we have put in a request with our backend devs. I would love a
Based.
control click to just say, I want it here and there. It's coming. It's coming. We're always looking to improve.
So the data connect expressions, again, we're going to use those to determine effectively what the unique keys are. So we'll save it against that sales order, unique sales order number. And so when we run it the next time, it's actually going to allow it to create, because we haven't persistently stored it yet, but run it a third time, that's when it catches it and doesn't move across. So I'll let Carl hook that up. Your value that you place inside of these key values is dependent entirely up to you. That should serve as some indication as to what might be valuable to you when you pull that report later, or if you want to check the state of that transaction, right? This is a sort of one-step transaction, so the value might simply be the response from 365 saying that it was successful or that it failed and why. So you can store the whole document there if you'd like to, where then later on when you pull a report it says this failed because we were out of stock or whatever the case might be.
100%. All right. Now, the Dynamics 365 sales does have an issue where it doesn't allow you to process the same order twice. So now we have done that previously, where we just ran the order the first time, so we would expect one of these records to fail, which is why I've now increased the index to 2. So we should be pushing 2 orders through to
Second
Dynamics.
one.
Yeah. All right.
So we'll run this now as, let's say, part of our V3 version of the iteration. What it'll do is we're going to loop through the entire process. It's going to create that order, and then it's going to log it persistently in your key values. And so again, the activity log gives you oversight of what's happening. A quick little side note, the activity log will tell you what's happening. You can decide whether you want to turn on low logging, meaning that once you've seen this, if it were to run outside of the actual design site or after design, it won't be logged, right? So for those who are working in industries with sensitive data, this doesn't have to be logged persistently, but otherwise it would be for X number of days, depending on your subscription. So we have a look here. We've actually identified the fact that your key value was missing, and we went and created that particular thing. However, so we got it. It determined to be a success based on the fact that the response was not false, or not. What did it come through? Did it work?
that one errored because we have processed it previously.
Okay. All right. So well, that's actually perfect. This is fantastic. So what's actually being shown here is it didn't send it to the success key value. It sent it to the error key value. Just because something failed doesn't mean you want to reprocess it, right? Over and over and over again. So what this would more likely then entail is the instance where you've processed something, it's failed, and you have a utility workflow that's going to pull out all of your error state and maybe try them or send a report on them. So Carl can go ahead and run it anyways again, and this time around it'll stop at the point where it's seen that key value.
Just going to bring the logs up a little bit higher.
Yeah, go ahead. There we go. So it stopped right there. It found that order, that particular order. So for duplicates, this is one of the methods that you can use. I think I said on the one part of the slide around efficiently querying data and deltas and stuff like that. That's another part, right? So this is a simple create method in where if it's been created, it's done. You no longer have to play with that particular record again for sales orders. But what if you're maintaining customer accounts where it has to be updated? Now, the other step to that would be with respect to how we actually determine what your filters look like in the beginning of the data, and then how we determine the deltas after the fact. However, I think you wanted to maybe just build one last thing, I think, out there.
Did I?
No.
We're very professional, we promise.
Yeah, so effectively, in the case of an update, and maybe you can plug in a reduce node there so long, there's going to be 2 stages to something where you do an update. Number one, your querying of data has to be as efficient as possible. Now, if you're lucky, you're working with an API that lets you provide filters. Those filters may have the ability to filter on a last updated date, which is fantastic, because then you're already getting that which is last changed in the source system, maybe the last hour or 2. You're going to match that with a cadence on how often you run the workflow. So if you're running the workflow every 1 hour, you typically have a look back time of, say, 2 hours. You don't miss anything. The next step is then to use the reducer, which Carl just placed onto the canvas. Now, this works similarly to the key value. It's actually technically also a form of persistent storage, but not plain text. What's happening here is with the provided group, you can actually inspect the payload. It's going to commit that payload in effectively in an encrypted form. And then it's going to compare it to the next time it sees the same payload and see if any of the fields have changed inside, and only let that which has changed pass to the next stage. So by that sort of method, you're going to filter on stuff and only provide that which has changed since the last time the workflow ran. And that's how you'll do updates for this particular thing. Anything you want to add there?
I don't think so. Oh, yes. In terms of the reduce node, we do have multiple
2 steps.
actions.
Yes.
So we can either reduce commits, so both things at once. We'll check the payload if it's come in, compare it to what was previously stored, and then commit the changes, or what happens if that now errors halfway down the line. Now you've got, that'll never be processed again because it's going to be reduced in the initial phase. So this gives us the option to reduce the payload that comes in, just using the reduce action, and then after we only get a success, we can then take that chunked payload and then commit that into the reduce store as well.
So we call that a two-stage reduce commit. Exactly the principle as explained. The only action that occurs on the initial part is the reduction to pass back what is expected to change, and then when you've got a successful response that you've interpreted through your Flowgear, or for your node, sorry, then you can actually commit that data to your reducer, and the next time around it won't come through. So maybe what you can do there is just disconnect the reduce, run the actual payload through, and have it just basically run twice. So the first time around you'll see, don't forget your path and stuff, eh? So everywhere in the platform you're going to have these path pickers effectively, whether it's a data connect expression or here where you have to choose at what level, you'll have that. So Carl will run this, and what's going to happen is the output from the reduce is going to be exactly what we got back. So let's just inspect that output.
It's the last one.
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah.
That one.
That's the one.
There we go. I reduced
And now we run it again. This time, was it a two-stage or one stage that you had there?
Reduce commit.
Okay, fantastic. So he's going to run it one more time, and we'll inspect the output just to prove that now this time around we don't actually have records there because nothing's changed. We could manually change that and run it again, and that one record will come through, but I assume you guys get the point. I did it.
That awkward moment.
That's what's supposed to happen, but it's a tech demo. So something, it's fine. I'm putting Carl under pressure, you're asking to do things.
Like we said, we're not good in front of people. The fact that our bosses trusted us with this is, I think, questioned on their side. All right. I think
That's fine. It's fine. Let's go back to the slide then, so we can touch on some of the other things. I think we had it over here. Okay, so briefly on triggers. I think for the most part, we don't really have to go through that again. But in terms of error handling, you did that with this section. Okay, that's the last slide then. Cool. So encapsulation and sub-workflows effectively. How do you take pieces of data and reuse that, right? So what we have is the ability to actually use a wizard which turns any of these pieces of workflows into a sub-workflow. And this might be relevant at different stages, right? As an example, perhaps your Shopify, your quick map and your reduction stage are going to be something that you reuse across your whole platform. So what you can do is you can actually select those multiple nodes with control-click, at which point you're going to be able to... Sorry. You're going to be able to actually use the wizard to transform that 3 blocks into a single one. Just someone disconnect that man, please. We'll call this sub-workflow actually. Okay, so we've got the sub-workflow, and what that's going to do is transport those 3 nodes into a single one, which we can now reuse. Now we can reference these in the workflow by clicking on the list of nodes where you would normally find your nodes, and then go and reference that over here by the workflow section. And all of your workflows are going to pop up here. So now the important part of this obviously is reusability. So the mapping portion and the reduction might happen across multiple parts of your system. So whether it's your accounts or your sales orders, you keep doing that part and then you can reference it. Should you make changes here, these changes will propagate down to any other workflow that's using that sub-workflow. And so obviously that will then take care of itself. There were questions around how we actually promote this. So we'll show this as well. I think it's important how we save workflows. So what I'll do is actually save this for not the first time, but one of the first times. And effectively what's going to happen is we allow it to save and navigate to something called our release management, which is the promote workflow button, where what we're actually seeing is not a single one of these versions have been saved in UAT or production yet. Obviously very important for auditing purposes and just general software development practices. You don't want that in production, right? Now the expectation here is for you to actually go and promote this from point to point by potentially using the UI in which you'll just merge it across. But what's actually happening in the background is if we head through to our commit hash, mentioned previously, the backing for this is actually GitHub. We are going to add support for GitLab as well as Azure DevOps and a bunch of things, but right now we're using GitHub as the core for this. And so the first thing it's going to do is going to load a diff or difference for the different workflow definitions that we had before and after we saved. Because the workflows are basically text-based, in this case JSON, you can see what's been changed on the properties, what nodes have been added, so on and so forth. And then the actual expectation for you is to, from this point onward now, do a pull request, and then the pull request becomes a review, and review becomes a merge, and once you've merged it, it goes into production, and that pops up as in production on the Flowgear side of things, on the canvas. So that's how we handle version control. Just going to head back. If it will let me.
Shift tab.
No, it's just not cooperating. There we go. Okay, cool. So alongside that, obviously, you have simpler tools such as our revision history. That's just going to tell you when something was saved and who saved it, and then you can revert back to that particular version. This doesn't really have to be synced up with GitHub in that capacity. You just want to move back to a particular version, should there be a problem with the one that you're actually working with. And then obviously, our audit trail, which kind of also goes along with that, which is going to give you an idea of all the actions that were taken against that workflow, whether it's saving, whether it's basically anything that can be persistent. It happens here, so you can see what that looks like. Anything you want to add on that side?
Yes, just go back to the workflow design, or the canvas, sorry.
Give me a second. Yes.
One other feature, second top right, second from the end.
The relationships.
Relationships, there we go. Very, very handy. Naturally, whenever you're updating a set of credentials, connection properties, even your sub-workflows, the whole point is that it's nice because you've got little snippets that you can reference multiple places. But now you want to update that. But if you update it for the specific workflow that you're working on, are you going to break 14 other production environments and your boss will run you over? Hopefully not. If we come here, we can see which connections are being used and which workflows are actually being used as well. Now, if we click on that little new tab button, I never know what that's called. For the connection property specifically, naturally we know this connection property was being used in that environment. And again, we click on relationships. We can see, when it loads, every instance that this connection property is actually used. So you have a nice broad visibility. If you update something, am I going to break something else? Saved me more than once. Very, very handy.
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah, so effectively, through the use of the relationships, you're able to track, obviously, what's being affected. So go ahead.
There's a quick question. In terms of your connections, if you're on the workflow itself, can you be able to see maybe through a coloring scheme or something that you are using a production connection or a UAT connection?
It's going to be entirely based on, I'll show you in a second when we have the screen. There's a ribbon on top that tells you what environment you're in, and I'll show you that in a second. That's going to be what environment you're on. Go ahead.
Instead of having log vanish, is it possible to obfuscate?
Yes, also true. So keep those two things in mind when we show.
Perfect.
So yeah, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
So your connection can be passed with a GUID, correct?
Correct.
Yes, good.
Is there a way to have that also show up in the dependencies and relationships?
Not in that manner, because it will be totally dynamic based on what data you're passing through. So you could inspect your logs in a way sophisticated way, but not quite the way that you see it here.
You might need to build a workflow to then look that up, which will then send you a report.
Okay, so first thing you asked was in terms of how do we know what environment we're on. So if you take a look here, you can see that we are currently on the test environment, and we can pick against what we run here by choosing UAT or production. And then all your connections will be in that particular space, so we're pulling from that space. In this case, we don't have anything for UAT or production, so it's not actually going to do anything. And then, sorry, to your question, which was, just repeat that, please. Obfuscation, yes, absolutely. So we said we could set low logging. Low logging means we track nothing as opposed to just the start times and end times, so you have at least some visibility for auditing. But if there's certain things you want to minimize on, you can select any particular property and then just redact that property using the redacted setting on the logs. So obviously you don't care about everything, but if there's maybe sensitive ID information or something going through, you can make sure that particular thing is obfuscated.
100%.
Cool, I'm going to check if there's anything else we missed there. Reporting, you want to quickly run the report for the key values?
Yes.
Okay.
Should be
So
saved.
Carl will show you what it looks like to pull those same key values out of the key value store and just move it into something simple that can be reported on after the fact. So this is typically set as auxiliary or ancillary workflows where your primary workflow will log the transaction, and then you have another one running maybe twice daily to send those reports through by pulling the data through from those key values themselves.
Key value report.
Now, how you can surface these is entirely up to you. We're going to, sorry, I shouldn't have finished the point then. You're going to effectively have the ability to pull it out, which would then be, in this case, a JSON format. But you can do what you want with it after the fact by pulling it into Excel or formatting it in capacity and then emailing it or pushing it into your ticket system. Doesn't matter. The point is your source of truth happens on the key value side, and then you can use it. So do you want to quickly ask a question before Carl? For logs? So logs will be dependent entirely on your subscription. I think we start at 30 days or something like that, and I think it's all the way up to 180. And I think on the enterprise plan, we can customize that for you. But there's also options to pull the activity logs out of Flowgear in bulk. So we give you two options for that. One is you can consume our internal APIs to get those activity logs into your systems. Oftentimes, customers want to put it into their Power BI or whatever they want to do with it, right? And then you can also actually get access to the key storage itself, the blob storage rather, from Azure, where you can pull that into whatever system you want. So we'll hold it for you, but if you want it in a more sort of significant format for yourselves, you're welcome to pull it out of the platform.
100%. One thing I just need to double check is that my key value names are the same. Naturally, they do persist throughout the entire site, but they are, if I believe, I stand to be corrected, they're case sensitive if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Just copy from the primary workflow.
I've no idea.
Microsoft folder. Just drag it to the right.
Eh?
Drag to the right. It's there. It's at the end of the workflow.
Oh. I'm doing very well today,
We were
guys.
told to zoom to 120 so everybody can see, but it's actually horrible to work like this. Yeah, just design and drag.
There we go. We're making progress.
We,
Slow.
I'm not ashamed to admit this. We had a very old platform where sometimes the node would just like shoot off into somewhere on the canvas. And it didn't happen often at all, so the problem was if somebody came through with a support ticket, what happened? We'd be like, no idea.
I just want to make sure I get to the right. There we go.
So just recapping, the group has to match with what was in the previous workflow, because again, it's available across the entire site. So we're going to go ahead and run that to the point where we just want to see what the output looks like for Excel. And then, yeah, that's about what we'll show for that.
All right. I'm actually just going to run that node so we can see the XML format. I don't necessarily want to open that in Excel because might have been other files
So
open.
just open the key values there.
That one.
This is the source of what it's going to look like coming in. We actually see two errors, and then if you can open up the value itself, you can see what type of structure is coming through. And you determine that when you set that value. That's entirely up to you. That what we're going to do now is we're going to pull it into Excel just to, is it going to run against the Excel?
It should.
Actually, it's fine. You didn't format it. It's fine. The point is, what this will do is send you an Excel file to your your email address, and there you have it. Then you can go and inspect that report. This is obviously very primitive. If you wanted to move it into something else, you could do that as well. Fantastic. So I think hopefully in sort of recap, some of the stuff that we showed you were the additional tooling that you would need to take this to a production-ready level. Oh,
Yeah, I have a question about the persistent storage on the key value.
go ahead.
Are you able to manage that, like clear out records?
Yes, you are. So I don't think we have it registered on our dashboard here, but you'll have a dashboard where you can see, first of all, high-level information of what your key values. So like how many failures you have, how many successes, and you can also clear them out as well if you want to.
Can you set like a strategy to clear out the last 30 days for a specific?
So they're not really intended for that purpose. So what you can do though is you can swap the groups if you really have to do that. So you can have a group per say a month or whatever if you wanted to do that. And that can be passed in dynamically. We don't really give that much control over the type of data and the key values. Otherwise, you delete stuff and then you don't have them there anymore. Cool. Sorry. So as I was saying, some of the stuff we showed you now hopefully is not just the core element of extract, transform, and load. It has to do with how you're going to efficiently query that data, how you're going to determine deltas on that data, how you're going to avoid duplicates, and obviously how you will inspect the responses from those APIs and then plug in any kind of handling to say, what do I need to do in the event of a failure? The last thing we want to touch on, yes, was complete failure. So what happens not if your if your output from the key values fail or from the API. But what happens if something totally fails? So what Carl's going to do is going to show you what these red lines are for.
So you'll notice every single node has a little red dot in the bottom right. That's if something breaks, that's the route it's going to take. Very similar to our blue execution. It kind of rewrites the workflow. Something broke, we're going to go do this because of that. Generally, this comes after running several tests, and you kind of have an idea of what needs to happen when the thing broke. But we can do that per node. We also have the option to do that from the workflow as a whole. So you'll see on the start node in the beginning here, we've got two options there. So any error or any unhandled error. So what this means is if you are writing from a node-specific error node, then naturally that is a handled error. So we won't trigger this in that case. And then it'll just reroute through unhandled. For now, we're just going to grab the any error. For instance, we pull that into here. And then just above that, we've got the last error information. So the last log sort of input that through the error, what was that message that was returned. So essentially, a very, very basic way to do this would be to just pass this into an email alert. Subject can be...
So ideally what you want to do is actually have this in a ticket system or something, right? Because complete failures are not supposed to happen very regularly. That's bad. Your database is down. But the nice thing, if I can say that, about complete failures is you haven't partially processed stuff at that point. Something stopped to the point where you cannot carry on, right? So we're going to alert somebody of that complete failure. They have to get the database back up again or whatever the case is, and then they can continue to process.
And naturally, this isn't just ring-fenced to email alerts. Any node that we have, you can route through an error section of the workflow. So you have a lot of flexibility and options in terms of how you want to handle these errors. Especially in terms of alerting, we can do Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp. I think we're busy in the process of rebuilding. Emails, the only thing we don't really do is come knock on your door in the morning and say, something's not right.
That's what the customers do.
100%.
All right. Cool, guys. So yeah, hopefully that gave you an idea of some of the extra steps that might involve a more production-ready workflow. I think got some time left over, so we'd love to take questions. It's the most valuable part of this actual interaction. We already had some, but we're going to give you guys an opportunity to ask any more. And if we can show you, we'd love to show you with those questions as well. So
100%.
anything, yeah, go ahead.
So, the email body, how descriptive would it be in terms of errors? Because currently you've got it connected to an email. Let's say down the line in your workflow you've got a certain JSON call out.
Mhm.
Do you have the ability to bring in a payload which is processable to interrogate that and still using the any error version? Would it be better to use a handled
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. So he's asking whether if you wanted to be a lot more specific around your errors, what would you do in the event of trying to maybe actually provide the payload that was part of the error, whatever the case is. In that case, you would do a handled error specifically. So on that step, you would have, through your iterative design, you would have understood or experienced that a particular failure could occur here. And even if it is a complete failure, you'll simply use the red line where you'll allow it to then transition to a point where you maybe combine your request and your response, put it together, format it nicely, and then send it across to that whoever has to get it. So you would handle that specifically. For unhandled stuff, it's really just something that shouldn't have broke. Here's the very basic description of why it broke. Based on what the node came back with, someone needs to do something about it. Go ahead.
This other area is something you can self-kill. Is
Yeah.
it possible to take output from that self-kill and introduce back into the workflow, or do you
Yes.
have to separate them?
No. So what we like to do, which is good architecturally speaking, is have utility workflows, which are basically copies of the primary workflows in their design, except there's a major difference in that they're not querying deltas. They're expecting you to input maybe an invoice number or something. And so if there's things that could be healed, we would maybe pull out a list of failures and the key values, run it through the utility, which is again expecting a particular invoice number, reprocessing it. That's the best way to do it. There's certain things you don't want to retry constantly though. So if we get an error around stock, out of stock for an order, I mean, there's no point in trying to reprocess that over and over again. So that's where a guy can come into the platform, log on. It might be the only interaction that particular person has is just specify an invoice number, reprocess it because they fixed the underlying problem, and that's that.
That also helps if your API has a quota limitation or something like that. Naturally, if it's errored, it's going to error very quickly for the most part.
Yes.
So we might just be hammering that endpoint and racking up your quota limits as well.
Yeah. So exactly, that's a fantastic point. So with the for eaches and stuff, that's also part of that limitation. There's very few limitations in Flowgear itself, but we have to play by the rules of our API partners and who's actually providing us the data and where we're sending it to. Anything else? Good.
You mentioned that you guys have Azure Blocks.
Mm.
So is it possible to connect this application to our own Azure Blocks instead of your?
Yes, absolutely. We've got nodes for that actually. So we can, I think, blob storage and blob file. So you can plug in your own credentials within the connection that you saw, kind of how we set up on the previous connection. And so you're more than welcome to use this, and then you also have access to your tenant's blob storage in whatever capacity you want, in case you want to pull logs and stuff out, as an example. But yes, that can connect to your environment, no problem. Cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to understand. Are you saying that there's an Azure block storage as part of your Flowgear account?
Yes, so for the new tenants, the logs are actually stored as blob storage, not Microsoft SQL, because obviously there's some challenges involved with storing tons of data in Microsoft SQL as. So we use blob storage instead. So our new tenants are functioning in that capacity, yes. Well, so we'll have a discussion about it, but I said we are open to the idea of giving you direct access to the blob storage, so you can query it in whatever capacity you want. But we can chat about that. Depends on what you need.
So building on that, is there any documentation already for what your limitations are on key value storage, zero block storage, email alerts in terms of limitations there?
So the blob storage and stuff is going to be basically dependent on your subscription, because that'll tell you how much you can store and stuff. Key values themselves, I'm not going to think off the top of my head. I don't think we have it officially documented, but I mean, send us a support ticket and we'll answer that question for you.
One nice thing that we haven't mentioned previously, on all of our nodes, if you click on them, at the bottom, there's a little thing that says help for this node. Generally gives you a very good idea on all the limitations and everything. It links directly to our help article. It will have if I'm not mistaken, it does have the size limitations for the key values, but I'll double check that for you.
That being said, with the AI stuff you guys saw now, probably won't even need that in the near future. Okay, I see we've run out of time, so I don't want to take anyone else's time extra, but if you have any questions, feel free to approach us on the floor here, and we'll happily answer you guys' questions. But thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys.
Cool.